When you're living with someone and love someone with dementia, grief doesn't start with death. It doesn't start the moment that the person dies. You're kind of grieving those little losses over time. You're sometimes grieving the impact that this diagnosis is having on you as a family. Sometimes you're grieving the fact that the person isn't able to do things that they would normally do and enjoy things they would normally enjoy. And it can actually, for many families, feel quite exhausting because it rolls. It's, you're living with this sometimes for many years before the person actually does die.
Welcome to My Life with Dementia, a podcast from Dementia UK. I'm Kula Bikini. I'm here because in 2023, I lost my dad to vascular dementia. And now I want to help other families who are going through something similar. Admiral Nurses are specialist dementia nurses who give families the space to talk to someone who understands. No question is too big or small. In this episode, two Admiral Nurses, Hilda and Vic, are sharing their practical advice and insights on themes from Tommy and Andrew's conversation. If you want to listen to Tommy and Andrew's episode first, you'll find it right next to this one in your podcast feed. You'll hear Hilda and Vic explore things like the benefits of music for people living with dementia, strategies to help men share more of their emotional lives with their friends, and how grief can begin to impact carers long before their loved one has died. If you'd like to speak to an Admiral Nurse, you can pause this episode at any time and follow the link in the show description to find out more.
I'm Hilda Hayo and I'm the Chief Admiral Nurse and CEO of Dementia UK.
And I'm Vic Lyons, I'm an Admiral Nurse with Dementia UK. So today we're going to talk about Tommy and Andrew and the episode that you just listened to where they're talking about men and how men cope with living with dementia. And one of the first things that I was thinking about is why do men find this difficult to talk about? Why is it that something men don't have those conversations in public? Because we know they're experiencing the same experiences, the same emotions, but actually talking about it and having that conversation is something that a lot of men struggle to do, and I think there's possibly some reasons around this that were kind of jumping out in my head. I was thinking about how men are socialised, how men cope privately. Not all men, obviously. This is a generational thing and a generalisation. But I think there's this tendency for men to feel like they've got to be strong, that they need to be the ones who are fixing problems and not burdening other people with their problems and their emotions. And I kind of mentioned generationally because I think for older men, I think this is even harder actually. You know, they don't always have the language to express their emotions. I loved the fact that this was recorded in a pub because, I've never been in a pub and heard men talking about their emotions. Football, darts, golf, all these things happen, but actually talking about their emotions and the impact that things that are difficult and challenging can be quite scary.
Absolutely. I mean, 30 to 40% of people that are family carers are males and don't tend to contact us in the same way as females. So over 70% of our calls, near 80% of our calls are from females on the helpline. Males are much less likely to ask for help. And for all the reasons that you gave, Vic, to be honest, it's that I should be coping, I should do that. And very frequently that means that they're not able to access the help and support that actually would help.
Yeah. I think even if you think about the word carer, you think about, you vision what does somebody caring for someone with dementia look like? What does the media portray that person as looking like? We do automatically start thinking about a woman, don't we? Well, we largely do. We think about a woman, we think about a daughter, a wife caring. But actually, if we consider the fact that, of course, lots of women live with dementia and, and they're going to have spouses and live longer and later into life, there's going to be lots of men who are carers, and yet we kind of don't bring that into our minds when we think about a carer and what does a dementia carer look like, or somebody who's caring for somebody. And I think if men are afraid to reach out because maybe they don't feel seen in the media, they don't feel this is the role they should be in naturally, they're missing out on so much because they don't get, like you said, they don't get access to that support, they don't get the emotional relief, they don't get the practical advice, they don't get that feeling that I'm not in isolation with this, there's other people who are in the same boat who can help me. And that sort of silence that men hold with that reinforces that, and it kind of feeds into it, and makes it even more scary. to reach out. And I think that's why it's brilliant that this conversation's happened and that we're having this podcast today, to kind of break that down for people and say, don't be afraid, don't feel you have to carry this on your own. Sharing isn't necessarily going to solve the problem, but it will make the load lighter. It will mean that you've got people who understand and can walk that with you.
And what I thought was interesting is when Tommy was talking about the effects that dementia has had on him as a person, and he was saying things like, it affected his employment, it affected his relationship, he felt he'd let his wife down. And I think that comes back to what you were saying earlier, Vic, about the way men perceive their role within that family unit and what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to be able to cope. And sometimes it's about keeping feelings inside, even with our loved ones, so we don't have to talk about things that are uncomfortable and make us feel vulnerable.
I think that came out in Andrew and his dad as well, didn't it? Because you've got two men there who were both feeling all of these feelings that we've just spoken about, and actually will have different ways of coping, different styles, different positions in the family. So, Andrew's dad, because he's Andrew's dad, would have naturally wanted to protect Andrew as well, to shield him from some of what was going on, to look after him. They'd both be carrying different feelings around guilt and actually, how do I cope with this? And different ideas about, actually accepting the diagnosis, accepting what was going on. And all of that brings so many different sorts of tangible bits, if you like, that actually, how do you navigate through that in a way that you're both on the same page? And people tend to have these disagreements in families not because they don't love each other, but because they just see things slightly differently. They sort of are in a different page, in a different position. And usually it's because they both absolutely love the people. They both want the best for the people and want to find solutions and fix things and feel a sense of responsibility, around actually making the right decision. And sometimes, as we know, in dementia, there isn't actually an obvious right decision. There's variations of decisions that you can make at any time, and working through the right one can be challenging as well for people.
It can. It's about trying to find out where the other person is coming from, trying to listen to the person, to acknowledge that their feelings and thoughts, and then to try and find some sort of middle ground, because often there's a middle ground that you can both kind of agree on. And I think this is where Admiral Nurses come in. So an Admiral Nurse can sit alongside that family, encourage them to talk about what it is that's behind some of these feelings and some of these thoughts, and actually plan for the future. Because in effect, we're sitting there as a facilitator.
And I think it's often about breaking down that fear as well that families have, and this certainly came up in Tommy's experience as well. This sense of fear, this I've got this diagnosis, but I'm worried. I don't want to upset people. I don't want to be a burden, and so I picked up that same sort of feeling of fear in both of them. Really, how and talking about things can make them feel real. If you don't talk about it, it's on a shelf somewhere, and you don't have to acknowledge it quite as much. I think sometimes the fear of doing something is worse than the doing it. As soon as you start doing it, you go, what was wrong with that? Why was I so worried? And I think that's the same message that I would say to men in general, actually, is if you've got a friend, if you're living with this diagnosis, don't let fear hold you back from having that conversation, because as soon as you start doing it, you'll probably feel this sense of, I'm glad I've started this conversation and I've acknowledged what's going on and the impact that this is having.
I think it was interesting that Tommy said that he goes out with his friends, but they never ask him about dementia. Yeah. They never talk about dementia. And sometimes I think that's about, they're probably not quite sure what to say. And sometimes it's probably they're fearing what that means, the diagnosis.
Worried about saying the wrong thing.
Exactly. And then I think that in some ways, probably Tommy probably ought to start the conversation first.
Yeah. I agree, and just normalise it.
Yeah,
this is something that we talk about other things. If we talk about all sorts of other conditions and situations, and normalising it and bringing it into the space and being relaxed enough to do that. But it's a big first thing to do, isn't it? And I can see why Tommy might not want that to define him and his personality. Of course he wouldn't. But if people know, and they've got that he's got that insight and can have that conversation, it brings that clarity. And that actually he's still Tommy. He can still do the things that Tommy would want to do, but just needing a little bit more support and guidance around him.
And probably saying that to his friends.
Yeah.
So saying, sometimes you might need to remind me that we're going to meet at the pub. So give me a call just beforehand. So kind of picking up some different cues that could be helpful. So his friends feel helpful as well.
I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah.
I think Tommy kind of hit the nail on the head when he said, still having a sense of humour. Music really helped him to live with dementia as well as is possible. And very often a lot of people will say that. They enjoy music, they enjoy listening to music. It helps them to feel calmer and much more relaxed. So finding different ways that help you to manage whatever it is that's going on in your life at that particular point in time. Because there will be highs and there will be lows, particularly if you're diagnosed. And the same with a carer, family carer.
Yeah. And I think music came through really clearly in this, didn't it? And we know this all the time. We talk about the power of music and the impact that music can have. But it certainly provides people with those connections, those kind of windows into normality and enjoying something wonderful together. And, and I've certainly worked with many people who, even in advanced stages of dementia, can remember their favourite songs. They can sing along and enjoy them. So even if someone's dementia is more advanced, still using music is going to be really powerful and provide that emotional connection, that joy, that happiness. And for many of us, it triggers a happy part of our brain as well and makes us smile and dance and move our bodies. So lots of other positive benefits there. But for some people, it might be other things. It might be cycling, walking, interacting with animals, or going to the theatre, or all sorts of different things that are going to bring those moments of joy and enable you to still be you. Andrew talks about anticipatory grief or rolling grief, and this is something that lots of people will identify with, and they perhaps only when we tell them what it is and that this is a real thing. Because when you're living with someone and love someone with dementia, grief doesn't start with death. It doesn't start the moment that the person dies. Actually, what happens is as the person changes and that things change for them, and you're kind of grieving those little losses over time. You're sometimes grieving the impact that this diagnosis is having on you as a family. Sometimes you're grieving the fact that the person isn't able to do things that they would normally do and enjoy things they would normally enjoy. So it's a kind of changes in personality, changes in the person, changes in how you see yourself and how that person interacts with you. And it's ongoing, and it can actually, for many families, feel quite exhausting because it rolls. You're living with this sometimes for many years before the person actually does die.
And I think so often people don't realise this is part and parcel of a long-term condition, whether that's dementia or another condition, and think that this is abnormal. This person's still with me, so why do I feel like this? And like you say, it's rolling. It changes over time. It doesn't always stay as, oh gosh, this person is going to be dying soon and therefore I'm going to feel this way. It doesn't. Sometimes you'll feel angry. Sometimes you'll say, why has this happened to me? And I think that's very, very difficult for people to come to terms with, because you'd expect that after the person has actually died. You don't expect it to happen to you whilst the person is still living.
And while you're still caring for them as well.
Exactly that, yeah. We are here as Admiral Nurses for people, whether that's on our helpline, whether that's our clinics, whether it's dropping us an email. So please contact us, because particularly men, they don't tend to ask for help. And it's not a weakness. It's not something that you should avoid doing. Sometimes it's just someone to talk to. We're confidential listeners, in effect. So sometimes it's just offloading or someone to talk to. Very often when I speak to some male carers, they offload, and at the end of it, they say, thank you for your help. And I didn't say a single solitary word. So sometimes just getting that offloading can be really helpful.
Starting to have those conversations and opening that door is only going to be better, because, as I said earlier, it might not make it all go away. With dementia, it can't, but actually it can help. It can start you on that journey to coping better with that diagnosis.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to speak to an Admiral nurse like Hilda or Vic yourself, you can contact Dementia UK's helpline. Just click on the link in the show description or visit dementiauk.org. The helpline is open every day of the year, except for the 25th of December. This has been an episode of My Life with Dementia, a podcast from Dementia UK. Please subscribe in your podcast app to get new episodes as soon as they come out. And if you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with someone you think might find it useful? You can take a look at the show notes for a link to our support services, which include online resources, ways to contact Dementia UK helpline, and information about Admiral Nurse clinics. Thank you so much for listening.